Again, my name is Julius Amin. I have some of our committee members are here, but Saturn is here. She's co-host. Dr. Saturn Navena, she's co-host. And again, my name is Julius Amin. I'm professor of history and endowed chair in the humanities here at the University of Dayton. And I want to welcome all of you to this webinar. And we hope that there will be no further glitches. We apologize for this. We apologize for this. And again, you know how technology is. When it works, it is perfect. And so every so often we have some glitches, but that's okay. Today we are here to begin the Global Voices Symposium here at the University of Dayton. And we want to make sure that if you are not following our understanding, please just put something on the chat. And then if you have questions, please put them on the chat. We will compile the questions at the end. And so at any point during the presentation, feel free to put your questions on the chat. Again, over the last 5 years, our annual symposium has addressed some of the critical challenges of today: race and racism, wealth and poverty, gender, immigration, freedom and responsibility, and war and peace. And we join the University of Dayton community and everyone else in praying for peace in the Ukraine. The theme of this year's symposium is Africa in our century. And we have a great line of speakers. Today, we will set the context, stating why Africa matters, why we should focus on Africa. And we will also show how major powers have interacted with Africa over time. Tomorrow, we have 3 panels focusing on issues of global concern: human rights, race and racism, gender, and more. Tomorrow we'll conclude with the keynote speaker, with a keynote address by Professor Landry Senior, whose talk will be entitled Unlocking Africa's Potential in a Time of Competition Between Rising and Global Powers. Today is March 1st and marks the beginning of the Women's History Month. The symposium recognizes this important month, and befittingly, we have presentations which focus on women and development. Then I'm going to share my screen with you for about 5 minutes. I'm going to begin with a video. And the setting of this video is the African Nations Cup competition which took place in Cameroon from late January to the beginning of February. We're going to watch about 5 minutes. Someone put together a video, and we're going to watch about 5, 6, 7 minutes of it, and then we will talk on the other end. So permit me to share my screen with you.
Closing day and the last day of the African Nations Cup hosted in Cameroon is here. This football tournament will cover the whole continent of Africa and the world by creating several types of emotions, but mostly joy and happiness. To participate at this event, 24 countries in Africa, the best players in the whole world, flew into Cameroon to make this event a memorable one. These countries are going to let you enjoy a glimpse of the joy this tournament brought to the continent of Africa.
Yep.
Also, in case your country participated in this tournament, or even if they didn't participate, but you are from an African country, kindly drop your flags in the comment section so that we know that you are here. After showing you the impact of this beautiful tournament on the population of Africa, it's now time to celebrate the winners. With the third position going to the host country itself, that is Cameroon. second place of this tournament eventually goes to the beautiful country of Egypt. Finally, the first place or the winner of the African Nations Cup 2021 edition goes to Senegal.
Okay, so I am gonna stop sharing. So I'm gonna stop sharing the screen again. That it's just about 5-6 minutes, and I want you to think about what you saw. You saw people excited, so much joy, a lot of community, sense of belonging, a lot of celebration, right? See, a lot of times when we hear about Africa, I mean, I live in the US. I mean, so when we hear about Africa, often the words which are used to describe Africa are anything but that sense of joy, that sense of celebration, that sense of community, right? Of belonging. We often hear, which I would put them in some kind of a diet of negatives. People are constantly weighed down with all kinds of problems. They are starving, they're suffering, they are back with, I mean, we could go on. Many of you know what I'm talking about. Even some people write about Africa, sometimes very learned people. Sometimes some of the books they write as if African people do not laugh, right? That African people do not relax or enjoy, right? And so, yes, Africa has problems, but the continent is much more than that. Africa is filled with ordinary people doing ordinary things, in fact, doing extraordinary things. The African people respond to changing realities. They apply new thinking to their issues, and so on. So we hope this symposium will help us to begin to implode some of those views about Africa, to begin to the symposium will challenge us to rethink prevailing perceptions about Africa, right? I mean, so that when we talk about Africa, we don't talk as if this is one monolithic place, all right? One homogeneous place that people are thinking the same way. So we hope that this is important. Again, why we focus on Africa? Because Africa provides so much to the global community. I mean, to begin to talk about the period between the 15th and the 19th century, it will take us a lot of time. Many people on this Zoom or somewhere else are familiar with the 1619 project and how much of a debate that project generated here in the United States. That's a different story, which can be addressed at another time. But in the 21st century, the 20th century and 21st century, Africa has continued to provide immense resources, right, to the rest of the world. And we could list some of these resources: cocoa, coffee, timber, cotton, diamond, gold, coltan, manganese. In fact, one of the things which made the people of Congo really upset was that when documents were declassified later on, they realized that the uranium used for the Manhattan Project, that's to make the first atomic bomb, came out of the Congo. Came out of the Katanga province in the Congo, right? I mean, the people of the Congo were upset partly because they were never known, but partly because it's not exactly a joy to say that something came from my place which was used to make the bomb. But yes, again, as I said, Africa provides immense resources to the world. We talk about coltan. Coltan is a mineral which is used for chips in cell phones, in PlayStations, in laptops. I mean, coltan is making us have this Zoom meeting. 75% of the world's reserve of coltan, known reserve of coltan, comes out of the Congo, right? And so this is, again, an immense contribution. So millions of people on this side of the Atlantic, or the other side of the Pacific, or the Indian Ocean, are major beneficiaries of the products which come out of Africa. And we will say a little more about that. So Africa indeed really matters. Then third, Africa is a huge place. It is complex. It is very diverse. It is the second largest continent in the world, with a population of 1.4 billion people, 54 nations, people speaking over 1,000 languages. People belong to thousands of ethnic groups. Africa is a major consumer market. It has an increasing youth population. It has, the diversity is immense, right? I'm going to share my screen again with you for 1 minute, right? Okay, so take a look at the map of Africa. In terms of sheer size, take a look at the United States, take a look at China and part of China also. Take a look at India, take a look at the UK, take a look at Eastern Europe, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain. All these countries put inside Africa, and there's still space available. It's a huge continent, right? Just in terms of complexity, diversity. So again, as I said, a lot of times we would hear sometimes very learned people say, oh, the African people are this. And then you turn around and say, what? Right? Africa is not a monolithic place. And it's important for us to conceptualize this in terms of size. So you look at the 54 nations there, right? So Africa is a huge place. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen again with you. And so one of the things you find here, again, as I said, I'm trying to state why we focus on Africa, why Africa matters. You look at the fourth reason. There exists so much ignorance about Africa's historical contributions to the development of the idea of the West. Educational institutions can and must do better to educate the student body, educate us about these important issues. And that is not just in the West, also in Africa. I was educated on both sides of the Atlantic. I was educated in Cameroon, and I was educated here in the United States. And in this education system, you find glaring gaps about the contributions of the African people, about the contributions of Africa. It is important. This knowledge, for example, is vital in the crusade against anti-Black racism. Africa has made tremendous contributions. In fact, Howard French's recent book, Born in Blackness, Africa and the Making of the Modern World, paints a vivid picture of Africa's monumental contributions to the world. In short, there needs to be a renaissance or re-education about Africa's global contributions. We must begin to ask new questions about the transatlantic slave trade, about the trans-Sahara trade, about the European scramble for Africa, about the Cold War and Africa, and so on. We must add to and rethink prevalent perspectives. Fifth, again, why we're focusing on Africa and why Africa matters. This is the 21st century, and it has added another dimension in the understanding of Africa's contributions to the world. In fact, the weekly newspaper, The Economist, refers to this new rush into Africa as, quote, the new scramble for Africa. And there are many indicators. There is Africa's rising population. The Economist states that by 2025, Africa's population will surpass that of China. It also notes that between 2010 and 2016, over 320 new embassies were opened in Africa, and this time not by the typical, or what you may call the usual suspects, not by Britain, not by France, not by Italy, right? Not by Portugal, not by Spain, but by other countries. Turkey, India. Turkey alone opened 26 embassies. India followed. Turkey is all over the continent. In fact, Turkish Airlines flies to over 50 African nations. Again, you see, China has surpassed the West in Africa. Now, China is the largest arms dealer in sub-Saharan Africa and has defense agreements with over 45 African nations. In the midst of this China's movement into Africa, US policy towards Africa remains makeshift. We're going to talk a little more about that in a few minutes. And Russia went back to Africa having summits, stating that in dealing with Africa, they will respect Africa's national sovereignty. Now we know what Russia means when they talk about respecting national sovereignty. Then 6, again, why are we focusing on Africa? There are rapid changes taking place globally, and we cannot afford to ignore what is taking place in Africa. There's rapid urbanization. It is estimated that by the end of the century, 13 of the 20 biggest cities will be in Africa. Again, 13 of the 20 biggest cities will be in Africa. In fact, between November 15th and November 20th, 2021, the United States Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, visited Kenya, Nigeria, and Senegal. During the visit, he stated, and I quote, the United States knows that on most of the urgent challenges and opportunities we face, Africa will make the difference. I believe Africa will shape the future, and not just for the future of the African people, but for the world, unquote. In another case, he stated, quote, the facts speak for themselves. This is a continent of young people. Africa is a continent of young people, energized, innovative, hungry for jobs and opportunity. By 2025, more than half of the population of Africa will be under the age of 25. By the year 2050, 1 in 4 people on Earth will be African. 7, why Africa is a focus of our symposium this year. Population growth and implications. Africa's population growth is important. In 2016, the population of Africa was 1.2 billion people. In 2019, it was 1.31 billion people. In 2050, it is estimated that the population of Africa will be 2.6 billion people. In 2100, it is estimated that the population of Africa will be 4 billion people. Africa's middle class is growing and becoming a huge consumer market. The youth population of Africa is estimated to be about 42% in 2050. And it has implications, right? That the world can join in helping to educate the youth of Africa, in helping to provide and create many of these manufacturing industries there. But the world will be involved later on because the youth may become radicalized. And so you think about Africa, many people on this webinar, as a result of the global pandemic, many people are familiar with this whole notion of what we refer to now as the supply chain disruptions. Manufacturing products, consumer goods are coming just from one side of the world. Take a look at Africa. Africa is closer to Europe. Africa is close to the United States. If these factories, these manufacturing centers are built in Africa, it will be much easier for some of these goods, some of these products to be distributed globally. So it's very important for us, as we listen to why we're focusing on Africa today, it's important for us to understand Africa's strategic location, right? Both for industries, both for factories. And think about the population figures I gave to you a few minutes ago. There will be a labor force. So it's very important for us to think about that. I'm going to switch gears for a second and talk about how major powers have interacted with Africa. I'm going to begin with China. And then I'll talk about the United States, then talk about Russia. I'm beginning with China for good reasons. It has a huge population. Many of the consumer goods that people consume are coming from China. Again, as I said, this is a country that is very involved in the distribution of goods around the world. But China has been very involved in Africa. And I'm going to share my screen again with you for a few minutes. I'm going to use some maps. And we're going to talk about this at the other end, right? Okay. So here we find two maps. One map 1980 and the other map 2016. If you take a look at the map, if you cannot read it well, so here is the blue area, right? The blue area represents, again, 1980. So we're talking less than 40 years ago, or 40 years ago, right? 1980, the blue area represents African countries whose per capita income was higher than that of China. 1980. It's important. Take a look at the map of 2016 now. Take a look at the blue area, a very tiny area. One African country's per capita income is higher than per capita income of China. Something must have happened, right? So here is China. I'm going to say in a few minutes why many African leaders are looking up to China, because some of them believe that in the space of 40 years, they can also become like China. So this is where Africa was in 1980. And this is where China was, right? In 1980. The per capita income, China's per capita income was higher than two places in Africa. So let me go to another map. So take a look at the map. Take a look at China's involvement in Africa. The years 2012, 2013, right? So very few areas, right? So we'll go to the next map. Take a look at 2016. Then you look at it, China's getting more and more involved. Let's look at 2018. Take a look at 2017. China is more involved. Everywhere in Africa, right? You name it. Take a look at 2018. China is covering up the place. And I bet you if I have the map of 2020, those other areas would have been covered, because we know that China is heavily involved in all these areas. China is very involved in Africa over time. Not only does China get involved, Chinese leaders are in Africa all the time. You talk to African leaders, you talk to some of them, they tell you that, you know what, Chinese leaders respect them. Chinese leaders visit Africa. Chinese leaders invite them and respect them in China. They respect them individually. They don't lump them in one room as if they're in a classroom, then talk to them and say, you people should do this, right? And so you're gonna find some more. So look at the Chinese leader in Tanzania. Look at President Xi in Tanzania. Look at President Xi in Rwanda, right? Look at him in Senegal. Look at Chinese leaders in South Africa. Look at him with the president of Cameroon. One of the things that becomes also important to understand is that, let me unshare the screen for you for 1 second, right? One of the things that is very important to understand, every year, the Chinese foreign minister begins his foreign trips outside of China to an African country. The Chinese leaders. The president visits Africa regularly. So you see why Africa is so important in China. To China. Remember I showed you that map earlier. The map of 1980, the map of 2016. China is the second economic power in the world. It's a huge economic power, maybe the first or the second, whichever way. China is way up there. And I can say right here that China's economy for many years has been dependent on materials from Africa. China receives petroleum and raw materials from Africa. 1/3 of China's oil comes from Africa. 20% of the country's cotton comes from Africa. Iron ore, titanium, cobalt, uranium, bauxite, manganese, all these things come from Africa. The economy is increasingly dependent on Africa. Africa has half of the world's manganese. Again, I mentioned earlier that the Democratic Republic of Congo has over 75%, has half of the world's cobalt, and over 70%, 75% of coltan, over half of the world's supply of carbonite. So here you find why Africa is so important to China. Chinese economy is dependent. I venture to say that African nations say, you know what, China, you have to do this or else these supplies are not going to be coming in. There will be major problems. China exports a lot of raw materials, a lot of consumer goods to Africa. China provides significant trade. Sino-African trade in 1989 was $1 billion. And in 2002, within a three-year period, was $200 billion. And there's also direct investment. Again, as I mentioned, African leaders, why do they prefer to go towards China? China doesn't ask questions about good governance. China doesn't sovereignty, except when it concerns China's interests, because China intervened in Zambia during the elections at will. Again, as I mentioned earlier, that African leaders think that if they follow the Chinese model, the Beijing model, instead of the Washington model, we're going to talk about Washington model in a few minutes. They believe that within 40 years, the development of their countries will be like that of China. China organizes conferences and meetings in which they bring in Africans. They have the forum on China-Africa cooperation. When the meeting takes place in Beijing, China organizes, they will have African cultural items in the areas where these African leaders will be going to show them that they respect the leaders' culture. And of course, China does this because China knows what Africa means to them. So again, as I said, this is very significant. China provides funding for lots of buildings, public projects in Africa. Think about it, in 1912 or so, China paid for the construction of the African Union Convention Hall in Addis Ababa. China paid for it. Chinese labor was used. Chinese companies constructed it. But here's the twist and irony. In 2018, it was discovered that computer files at that convention center were being downloaded nightly to computers in Shanghai. African leaders were furious. What a surprise. China paid for this. Chinese companies built it. China designed it. And African leaders were so surprised why computers were being downgraded to China, to computers into China. Again, one of the things China does is that when there are issues which emerge between Africa and China, the Chinese leader front ends them, moves quickly to address them. In 2020, when there was massive racism against Africans in China, in fact, some of the Africans were being accused of spreading COVID. They were kicked out of their apartments. The Chinese leader responded quickly. apologizing for it, stating that it will be corrected. That relationship between China and African countries, it's important, and it continues. When COVID took place, China immediately sent plane load of supplies to African nations, right? There is that relationship. I mean, keep in mind what diplomacy is about. Even though many people say, no, you can, diplomacy, the way it's practiced, even right up till today, unfortunately, is about eternal interest, no eternal friend, not about eternal friends, not about eternal enemies. It's about eternal interest. China understands what its interest is. And so you see, for a long time, the United States, people in Africa looked up to the United States. But something happened. America is a superpower, and we all know that superpower status demands superpower responsibilities. Yet for long, Africa was an afterthought in US policymaking. In fact, the Bureau of African Affairs was not created in the US State Department until the 1950s. When John F. Kennedy became president, he vowed to change that. He was determined. Kennedy spoke during his campaign, and he stated early on that Africa is too important to be ignored. Kennedy will personally welcome African leaders at the airport. He will go to the airport in Washington, D.C. to welcome African leaders who came to Washington for an official visit. African leaders stated it, wrote about it, the friendship, the ease with which Kennedy treated them. Sure, there were political reasons why Kennedy acted that way, but he showed his leaders respect. Kennedy created a Peace Corps, basically stating that, you know what, for too long, America knew nothing about what takes place in African countries and other parts of the world, other developing parts of the world. Peace Corps volunteers go to Africa, help in the development. Go to Africa, live with the people. Let the people know that Americans are good people. Peace Corps volunteers go to Africa, learn about the African people, return to America, and help America create better policies for African countries. About the one concerning creating better policies for African countries, the jury is still out. But unfortunately, John F. Kennedy's time in the White House lasted just for about 1,000 days. His life was cut short by an assassin's bullet. And unfortunately, his successors did not continue with his policies. His successors reverted to looking at Africans as inferior, describing Africans publicly as cannibals. Some referring to African publicly as children. Using demeaning language to describe African people, that African people are too sensitive, right? They're too emotional. Language we all know that it's called language for something. And so this becomes very important. Then that's what we find here again, as events moved towards the 20th century, some good policies were created, but still the respect that the African people, the African leaders are looking for, that was not coming. During the Clinton era, President Bill Clinton's era, there was the establishment of the African Growth Opportunity Act, which allowed the importation of goods produced in Africa into American markets. President George Bush did a lot for Africa in terms of AIDS awareness, providing assistance for awareness. President Obama created the Youth Leaders Initiative, also created a US-Africa Summit on which to build on. Then, of course, there was Africa Command created, again, to protect America's interest in Africa. And so, for all this period, the failures to take Africa seriously cost America dearly in Africa, become detrimental to America's interests. And of course, so there has to be a deliberate shift in American policy towards Africa, because African nations are no longer where they were in the 1960s. They are no longer where they were in the immediate period after after independence. For all the problems that exist in Africa, African nations are more sophisticated. They are more knowing. They are more savvy. You know, I'm going to share the screen again with you for 1 minute, right? Okay, we just talked about John F. Kennedy. That's President John F. Kennedy up close with Kwame Nkrumah, President Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, up close. That's President John F. Kennedy with President Julius Nyerere of Tanzania. That's President John F. Kennedy welcoming President Leopold Senghor. Right. That's President Bill Clinton and his wife, and Mrs. Clinton, in Ghana, with President Jerry and Mrs. Rawlings. That's President Clinton, again, walking in Africa with school kids. That's President George Bush with the President of Liberia, former President of Liberia. Then she was president at that time, President Ellen Johnson of Liberia. President George Bush in Kenya. Then President George Bush in Kenya. That's President Barack Obama and Mrs. Michelle Obama at Elmina Castle, the door of no return in Ghana. I don't want to get into the story about the door of no return, but because it will take a long time. But that is a door. Elmina Castle is a slave castle in Ghana. And the door of no return is a door when anyone who went through that door never returned to Ghana. Any slave who went through that door never returned to Ghana. Ended up in the Atlantic Ocean. That's President Obama, again in Tanzania. President Michelle Obama. That's President Obama with the President of Kenya. Again, President Bush and Obama in Tanzania, honoring the bombings that took place, right, in Tanzania, 1998. Then Vice President Joe Biden in Kenya. Again, meeting with embassy officials. So one of the things you notice, virtually every person who had been in the White House in the period, in the 21st century, everyone who's been in the White House in the 21st century has visited African soil but one. So again, you find here, which is very important in terms of the notion to try to develop and create and build a better relationship between Africa and the United States. Again, I wanted to talk a little bit about Russia, but I'm going to leave Russia for now because Russia's premise early on, again, as I said, had the first Russia-African summit in 2019, which basically promised Africa that Russia will respect the national sovereignty of nations. And today we know. So again, I'm gonna leave Russia for now. But one of the things I want to do is that this symposium is taking place on a university campus. We've talked about all these leaders. We've talked about these nations. What about students? What about university students? What does Africa mean to the students? All over this country, universities send students to Africa. Many of these trips were interrupted by COVID-19. But it's important for us to listen to the voices of some of these students, what Africa meant to them. And so here at the University of Dayton, we have repeatedly sent students to different countries in Africa. We sent students to Cameroon, to Zambia, to Togo, to South Africa, and to many other places. And these students were heavily impacted by some of their trips. They were heavily impacted by Africa, by the experiences in Africa. So I'm going to read some of what these students wrote about the African experience. So this is coming, excuse me, mostly from students who went to Cameroon and Sierra Leone, right? Victoria Better participated in the Cameroon experience, student at UD. After the experience, she wrote, quote, "I left Cameroon feeling self-confident, self-assured, and normal." Erin Kaufman stated that in Cameroon, she felt, quote, "the best she had felt in ages, found a sense, quote, "a sense of clarity," and felt fulfilled. The people of Africa, wrote Kelly Doherty, quote, taught me how to live, and I'm forever indebted to them," unquote. Cameroon was, quote, "once in a lifetime experience," wrote Edrin Berger, adding, quote, "I am so happy and grateful that I was able to be part of this experience." African Emotion participant Joe Wayman wrote, quote, "Going to the University of Dayton was the best choice I made in the first 18 years of my life. Going on this trip was the best decision I made in going to UD." Another African Emotion participant at University of Dayton wrote, Tiffany Wyatt wrote, quote, "The Cameroon experience, the Cameroon Emotion program fundamentally changed my life. Being in Africa gave me time to sit back and examine the ways in which I act." Another student, Sharon Spurren wrote, quote, "This emotion taught me that the interconnectedness of the human race is highly underestimated by its members. Why is it that we view people who live in countries other than ours, other than our own, as different and unable to connect with us and us with them? We all laugh at funny things. We grieve, we feel longing, we feel pain, we comfort each other, we sing, we eat, we dream, we live our lives. It is only when we stop and think about it that we realize how much really connects us." Katie Eber, quote, "The people of Cameroon taught me what it means to be human, what aspects are universal, and how beautiful diversity can be." Again, another participant, I'm almost done with reading these extracts. Emily Petrus wrote in her journal on departure day from Cameroon, quote, "This is my experience. I yearn for Africa. A piece of my heart will surely remain here. I could not convey with enough justice what my mind and soul sees in the country. But I hope this journal will suffice and remind me to never forget I must not abandon the ideas and perspectives formed by the people who touch my life. I will be better. And remember, no condition is permanent." Susan Brown, who served a year in Sierra Leone and 3 years in Namibia, wrote, quote, "The African experience changed my perspective on prejudice, justice, religion, and American culture." So you find there are lots and lots of extracts from what students at our university wrote and students from other universities about what Africa meant to them. I'm gonna, again, share the screen with you for one more minute, okay? So let's take a look at this, some of these students. Those are students from the University of Dayton on the stairs at the Institute of International Relations in Yaoundé, Cameroon. That's a UD student at the Toleti plantation in Tola in Cameroon. And many of the students went to plantations and they saw exactly what that entailed. In our School of Engineering here at the University of Dayton, there's a program, this University of Dayton, a School of Engineering has known as Ethos. The students of Ethos go to different parts of the world and engage in different service projects. These 6 students went to a community where there was no road to get there, outside of the city of Kumba in Cameroon. They spent 4 months, 3 to 4 months in this community, They had gone there before to visit the place. And when they visited the place, the people told them that they were suffering. They didn't have water. They decided that they will give them water. They returned to University of Dayton, planned for the trip the following year. And the following year, they went to this community. They lived in this community. Community doesn't have indoor plumbing, no running water. They lived in this community for 3 to 4 months. And by the time they were done, they had given water to this community in Barron Bay. So you can look at this. This was, I think it was 2008, 2009 or so. So this is a long time ago. You can look at the students, they're young now. They are practicing their different, they're in the different professions right now. I mean, so again, I mentioned this because of the ability of what students do. That students are able to make a difference. And this is an example, again, as I said, the Ethos program, which I think because of COVID, like every other program, I think around the world, was slowed down. So you find them there with the chief of the village, right? Watching and really grateful how finally these young students came and they were able to get water. Here is a student who worked at the Women Empowerment Center, the Women Empowerment Center in Kumba, Cameroon, where they were based. Again, the women who come over there have very sad stories. These students spend 2.5 weeks with them, listening to the stories, talking with them. And by the time the student left, they had become friends. When I spoke to the director of that center, the director told me that, you know what, those 2 students who were there, the significant thing they gave to the women at that center was unquantifiable. They provided women at that center hope, right? So a lot of things that students at the University of Dayton, in fact, I would say Peace Corps, right? They provide significant hope to the people of developing nations. Again, as I said, I talked to some of the people who use the Women Empowerment Center, speak to the leader. And there's a group here from the University of Dayton, which visited the center, including Dr. Emmy Anderson, Dr. John Hurst, and Dr. Daniel, Malcolm's Daniel, right? So again, as I said, that this is important. So we find students at an ice cream place in the capital of Cameroon, Yaoundé, just relaxing, right? So we began the talk by watching a video of celebration. Once our students go to Africa, not that they don't celebrate here, or anyone who travels to Africa, celebration and happiness is contagious, it's infectious. So these students were at the reception, and so they were in their attires, which they are all made, and so they were having a good time. And the reason I'm showing all these photos is to let people understand. I began by saying that the time has come for us to implode the perceptions which traditionally define Africa in Western countries. The time has come for us to understand that the continent of Africa is full of ordinary people doing ordinary things, right? Take a look at our students. And so you find, again, our students, many African nations are bordered by either the Atlantic Ocean or the Indian Ocean. So you find some of them by the Atlantic Ocean. So here's students with the US ambassador in Cameroon inside the embassy. They go to the embassy, they ask the embassy direct questions. What is the relationship between this country and the United States? Direct questions. What is the United States doing to make a difference, right? And they ask the ambassador, how can I become an ambassador in career options? So again, you take a look at students. While they travel, they visit some of the factories in the country. They're visiting brasseries to Cameroon, right? One of the major factories in Yaoundé. So again, you find, so I'm gonna get back to the screen. So you find, again, as I said, I have deliberately shown videos, shown images, photos of US presidents who visited Africa, except one of them. All of them have been there except one. I have deliberately shown images of students in Africa. I have spoken about how crucial Africa is to the global systems in ways that we generally do not understand, we generally do not realize, we generally do not see, because somehow we think about Africa only in a particular way. And so when we decided to make this symposium, Africa in a Century, we said it is important to talk about Africa. There's so much about Africa, right? So what I've done here is basically provide some kind of a glimpse. And a lot of times when I talk about Africa, people tell me that, you know what, you're saying that because you're African. No. I'm first and foremost a historian who writes and researches based on the rules of evidence. I'm true, yes, I'm one of Africa's biggest propagandists. Right. But what you find here is why Africa should count, why Africa should matter. So I know that I have spoken a little more than the time which I was supposed to speak, but I'm going to stop here and then turn it over to questions. Somehow at the beginning of the session, I think because of the internet, because of the way it was connected, because we struggled a little bit early on, we did not have the chairperson. I don't know whether the chairperson is here, right? So I'm going to turn over to questions. So I'm looking at the chat to see, again, again, I'm sorry about any questions? Can you put your questions on the chat? Any questions? Any questions? Yes, please. Because, so, Emmanuel Kengo, please. Dr. Emmanuel Kengo, please, yes. Because of the way we're dealing with a Zoom, I do not know whether you can you ask the question, can you put it on the chat so that, let me see. Okay, so.
Dr. Amin, there are
Yes.
some questions in the Q&A section as well.
Okay, so here, I mean, so here is a question here in, do you think China's involvement has been mutually beneficial? Clearly, China's involvement has been, first and foremost, very beneficial for China. And then secondly, African nations have benefited to an extent. Let me give you an example. Consumer goods, which used to be very expensive, have become accessible to many, became available to many people. Many years ago, for example, when I visited Cameroon, a DVD player, for example, at the turn or maybe the late 90s would cost about $500 in Cameroon. About 15, 20 years later, it cost about $30 when China began to ship them in large quantities. People used to rally around a small television set to watch it. So they're able to have these consumer goods. But one of the problems is that China's involvement, while it's been helpful, has contributed to an extent to the underdevelopment of local industries in African nations. In fact, many years ago, I think that was 2015 or 2014, I actually did an article in the African Studies Review about that. Many of the infant industries, for example, when I was growing up, to be a tailor, to sew clothes was a fanciful thing. What's a wonderful thing. There were so many tailors. But the clothing industry has been destroyed in many of these countries because it's cheaper to buy the goods dumped in from China. It's cheaper to buy the rubber goods dumped in from China. But what is more important is that China has been unwilling to share technology with African nations. In some cases, many of the loans or money China uses in building some of its projects, many of the workers are coming in from China. In some cases, China would bring in those who do the manual work. There was a study done at one point which someone stated that some of the Chinese directors, leaders in some of these African countries would go for about a year without going to the grocery store in the African country in which they serve. The food is coming straight from China. And I ask this fundamental question: how is it possible that, think about the involvement of China in these countries, yet in terms of manufacturing goods, these countries are still where they are. Timber, for example, wood, for example, look at the quantity of wood. The rainforest is being systematically destroyed. Yet paper is a luxury in these countries. Chalk is a luxury in these countries. These countries are basically huge producers of raw materials such as chocolate. I mean, cocoa, but chocolate is a luxury. So the big thing is that why does China not partner with this industry? Why does China, with some of the industry, why does China not transfer technology to this industry? This is the 21st century. Technology matters. I just mentioned at the beginning that coltan, for example, the Congo Democratic Republic contains over 75% of the world known reserve of coltan. The per capita income of the Congo, I think it's barely $600 or $700. So here is a country that produces an inelastic commodity, which is used by everyone around the world. But this country continues to swim in an ocean of poverty. So yes, it has been mutually beneficial, sometimes for the leaders. China doesn't ask questions about good governance. China doesn't ask questions about corruption. China promises that there will be no intervention in your national sovereignty, non-intervention. Leaders of many African countries want to hear that. Because they say that when the West shows up, the West say, well, what's your human rights record? No, China doesn't ask those questions. And so yes, it has been mutually beneficial to an extent. And so China sends to African nations consumer goods. Again, clothing, consumer goods, not producers' goods. But it's nations that need capital to produce things. They need equipment to produce things. Right? Not consumer goods. And so, but it's important, again, as I said earlier, that when you go to many African nations today, There's growing impatience about the role of China. It was celebrated, but now there's growing impatience about the increasing poverty, about the inability for them to be creative, because almost anything they want to start developing comes immediately from China. And so yes. So here is another question. So what are the African leaders and intellectuals doing to harness advantages of foreign students? That's a very good question in terms of, because one of the things China has done, and I'm glad that question came in. I mean, China provides significant number of scholarships to African students. One of the figures I have here, I think it was stated a figure of 2018 or something. There were 50,000 African students studying in China. And so what you find here is that the question about African leaders, I mean, and intellectuals, and I'll go back to the Kennedy era again. One of the things the Kennedy administration began doing was to encourage different areas to provide scholarships to people from African nations to study in the United States. And that was taking place, right? And I can say this with authoritatively because I just did an article on US Cameroon foreign policy. Again, it came out of African Studies Review, right? But that did not continue. It is the hope that the Bureau of African Affairs, the Biden administration, would look into this carefully. Because one of the things the Biden administration, President Biden administration, has stated that one of the avenues for development of Africa, for continuous development of Africa, is to educate Africa's youth. That Africa's youth hold the key to development, right? I mean, so yes, that's a good question. I mean, for many years, African leaders would provide scholarships to people studying in the United States, right? But that stopped. I mean, so again, as I said, intellectuals, in terms of intellectuals, what am I doing, for example? I'm going to use myself as an example. What am I doing, for example? I mean, part of what I do, for example, and I know some other people doing different things, for example, to be able to encourage students. When I go to universities, when I visit universities in different parts of the world, in different African countries, and I tell students that education is the only debt in the sea, and that once you do well, the most important thing is do well, right? Do not say that I'm heading for your remedial, I'm heading for the United States immediately. I mean, I've had cases where I'm talking with students that, you know, I encourage students that you need to get your bachelor's degree. You need to be good at what you're doing first before you look at anything else. I mean, students have asked me, some students have said, you know, what about me? I said, well, sometimes what you see is me, right? If you really want to know about me, you have to take the time to talk to me about how I came to what I'm doing, right? I mean, so one of the things, so it's really important that when the intellectuals, especially the African intellectuals, and I'm challenging African intellectuals, right, who live in this country, and Americans, American universities, to partner with African universities, to partner with African people. So many good things can come out of it. Again, I can probably say that for a long time, the University of Dayton has been involved in many types of projects with different countries in Africa. And so again, there is another question, right? That what guarantees have been established to safeguard the environment as China depletes the mineral supply? That is a very good question in terms of China is becoming a signatory of many of the environmental agreements. But it's up to the African leaders. Because at the end of the day, the leaders are responsible for the sovereignty. You're right that some of the activities of China, and not just China, or some of the Western companies, are devastating to the environment. But it's up to the leaders of the countries. And so my take is that asking leaders to be mindful of environment is not a political issue. It's not, say, I'm challenging your leadership, right? But it's an important thing, because when you look at many of the documents coming out of the African Union, coming out of many of the countries, there's so much emphasis on the protection of the environment. And so by asking these questions, one is not reinventing the wheel. One is basically saying that as a signatory of this AU, African Union Agreement, as a signatory of this document, you agreed to do this. Let's see how we can do this. And of course, it's also very important. And I often tell people, again, I go back to asking a question, a challenge that John F. Kennedy issued to young Americans in the early 1960s. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for the betterment of your country, or what you can do for your country, if the quote goes that way. So I have asked friends in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Cameroon. I said, yes, we have some significant issues. We have some significant problems. But what are we doing? What are we contributing? How are we contributing to make things a little better? It may be just talking to a classroom, talking to a group of school kids. Maybe partnering with a professor or an instructor and say, let's try some of these methods. Again, nothing is so small, and I use this example. I'll give you another example to tell you that nothing anyone does is so small. And that's why I'm issuing a challenge that everyone must do his or her part. Let me give you this example. One of the areas I research on is on the Peace Corps. Many years ago, a Peace Corps volunteer went to one of the former directors and told him, a Peace Corps volunteer who served in an African country, and told one of the former directors, they were back in the United States, and told the director, you know what? That the Peace Corps director said, you know what? That he was so angry because he wasted 2 years in Africa. He spent 2 years of his life in Africa. Look at the way Africa is today. Look at the way that country is today. And the director looked at him and said, you know what? Consider what you did. Consider it to 1 grain of sand. The grain of sand is so tiny. And that if everyone can drop 1 grain of sand, together you'll form the beach. So again, I'm issuing a challenge that everyone should drop that grain of sand. Do not be concerned about what I do or the other person does. Just do your part. That is really important. Again, as I said earlier, this is a continent, despite the fact that it looks as if there are so many flashpoints. This is a continent on the move. This is a continent on the rise, right? This is a continent coming together. And so it becomes really important for us to think about that. So let me look at other questions. Are there other questions?
Yes, in the Q&A section.
Okay, are you able to read it? I'm not seeing.
Sure. Yeah, I think some of them you slightly answered, but both Chris and Emma, Chris is interested in you speaking more on the implications of the China model to the prospects for democracy in Africa going forward. And Emma's question is, how do African labor forces compare US and Chinese labor opportunities?
Can you read the first part again, the first part of the question?
From Chris, he said, can you speak a little bit more on the implications of the China model to the prospects for democracy in Africa going forward?
This is one of the big problems. I mean, the China model is clearly what moved China, for example, from where we saw on that map in 1916 to where we saw China in 2016. I mean, 1980, from where we saw China in 1980 to where we saw China in 2016. China is a different country in the sense that some of the freedom, some of the issues that African nations deal with, they don't exist in China. China decided to invest on the infrastructure, the building of cities, the building of bridges, the building of, so thousands of miles of it. China believes that development follows good roads. But African leaders need not be told that. They know that infrastructure is important. And so, but of course, in terms of dictating to people in a lot of ways, I mean, so there are issues about China, and I know I have some of my colleagues who are on this webinar, some of them are experts in China. Some would probably disagree with me on some of the things I say, or some will agree with me. There are issues in China. I mean, the one-child policy, and then so there are different issues that exist, right? But of course, the agreements which African nations signed at the time of independence, some of those agreements continue to give former colonial powers the latitude to intervene in African nations at any given moment of the day. They were members of the French community, the Franco-African agreements. Those agreements France signed with them, for example. And so yes, so Africa needs to look for its own paradigm. Africa needs to chart its own model. China charted a model that works for China. Africa has a lot of talent. Africa is capable of charting its own model. How do we do research? We build from existing studies to forge, to create a synthesis, to come up with bold initiatives, bold ideas. I was talking to someone the other day. For example, we are in the global pandemic. I was in Ghana and Togo in August. I was also in Cameroon in August. And people were not paying much attention to it, to the global pandemic. It is there, but the effect, the impact was not as intense as I saw over here. I was talking to someone the other day that, you know, this is an opportunity for governments in African countries to provide funds to scientists at African universities, African research centers. Why is COVID-19 not as intense here? Is it because, as some people say, there are different, some people are talking about the weather. Some people are talking about, oh, people don't live in close proximity, which we all know that's not true, right? But some people are saying that long period of taking malaria medication. No, that African governments can at least begin the process. And once they begin the process, once the scientists begin to live the process, I bet you they'll be able to get partners in other parts of the world on how to do this research, to figure out what is it, because again, as I said, I talk to friends in all these other countries. Yeah, COVID is there, but it's not as intense. There's something going on that needs to be studied. And the way to study it is to partner, to let the scientists within the continent be at the forefront. They need to be funded. The governments can fund them. And of course, other think tanks, research tanks in the West or in China can do this. Again, there you find it again. Why would China not partner with industries in the continent to produce the vaccines or to do something. So again, as I said, it's the model. African nations have an incredible number of talented people. There's incredible talent, right? And I again, as I visit and I talk to colleagues, and I go to the office of some of the colleagues, and I see books that they produce, and I can talk largely from my angle, from the humanities, and I said, this is unbelievable. And so yes, so African nations should not say, okay, we're going to do the Beijing consensus or the Chinese model or the African model, because already there are things inside the culture which are very beneficial. One of the most significant aspects about African culture is a sense of social responsibility. People understand this, that you must play a role. It is crucial. I mean, I teach a class, Modern African History. I tell my students up front that I may not live in the village, but my value system comes directly out of my village value system. That if I go somewhere and I do well, people tell me that you've done well, I will thank them. I will tell them, you know what, my village has done well. My family has done well. It's not just me. So there's a sense of social responsibility that can be tapped into. And of course, while speaking, I kind of forgot the second question about labor. Satan, are you there?
Yes, I am here. From Emma, stated, how do African labor forces compare US and Chinese labor opportunities?
That's a huge question, and I can interpret it in, there could be several interpretations there in several ways. I mean, one of the things about the labor force is that the labor force needs to be equipped for the 21st century. And African governments have a fundamental responsibility, even if help is going to come from outside. Governments have a sacred responsibility. The leaders have a sacred responsibility to prepare the population for the 21st century. Because again, as I said, there is no way out without education. I often say that education is the only deck in the sea. And I borrow this phrase from the one-time abolitionist leader, Frederick Douglass, who talked about some other thing, but I borrowed the deck from the sea. So, and I began by saying earlier that the estimates by 2050 show that a significant number of people, the population of young people in Africa, will be a billion, over a billion. These young people need to be integrated into the economy. These young people need to be educated for the economy of the 21st century. These young people need to be equipped with skills. They want to work. They need the skills to work. They need these countries, China, the US, Britain, France, all these other countries, who work with Africa to create partners, to create manufacturing centers in Africa, because these young people would work there. Again, as I said earlier, that there's a flip side to this. To look the other way and just ignore, okay, that's in Africa. No, it's not in Africa. We live in an interdependent global community. Whether we like it or not, that train has left the station and it's not coming back. We can jump in and help shape it, or it's going to move without us. So if these young people are left without the proper skills for the industrial economy, without the proper skills to work, there's a flip side. There's radicalization. There are radical groups to recruit them. When Boko Haram began, Many people in the Western countries said, that's in Africa. But before long, it was being listed as a major security threat, not just to neighboring African nations, but to the US, to France. There was a meeting which took place in France, in Paris. The US representative was there. The Nigerian representative was there. The Cameroonian representative was there. The Lake Chad Basin countries, the presidents were all there. This meeting was followed by another meeting in London. This was, I've forgotten the exact date. Again, I know the exact date because I've done some work in that area. And all of those, including the American representatives, they agreed at that conference table that this is a threat. It's a global threat. And so, again, as I said, that is really important for the President Biden administration to follow through or to follow up on what he articulated. He already articulated it, that the young people in African countries, they need to be equipped with skills for the 21st century. They need to be educated. So it's not something that he's going to go to the drawing board and say, look here, advise us, figure out. No, that is already in documents. And most of us know that sometimes it's a long way between what is written on paper and what is put in practice. And so I will vouch, again, as I said, that given the right setting, given the right environment, the young people in all these countries, they're looking for work. They are looking for skills. They are determined. They speak in terms of they want to make the country better. They speak, I know so many people, particularly in Cameroon, who you tell them, okay, here's a job offer here. Come to the United States. They look at you and just laugh. That I'm here, and I know I'm going to make it here, right? So yes, so it goes back to the point I mentioned earlier, that the skills are needed. And I think the skills are going to come, right? So here's a very good question. How can we as an American students be useful in the development in Africa while avoiding white Severism? That is a very good question. In terms of, one of the big things about this is that we mentioned that we take students to different parts of Africa. When students apply to go, we normally would give an application form to them to take it home. Typically the routine was, take the application form to your parents and tell them during Thanksgiving so that you guys will discuss it. And then when you come back, you will let us know whether or not it's still going. Because we know parents are skeptical. And I always tell people that I'm a father of 3 kids, right? If I was born and raised in this society and know what I know about this, Africa, by just looking at papers, I would also have problems saying at least you have to. So there's so much miseducation. So we tell our students, they would come and say, I'm going to serve. I said, okay, let's go. They will go to Africa and we'll tell them, just be yourself. And honestly, most of the students who went to Africa, who went to Cameroon, who went to Togo, who went to different parts for immersion, for experience, they continue to stay in contact with Africa in different ways. We had a student here at the University of Dayton. He went to Africa and he decided to return and to teach at one of the schools there for 1 year. After a year, he took an extension another year. After another extension, he taught there for 3 years. He impacted students. Many of the students he impacted, many of them will go on to become something. Many of them will never forget that. And so I go back to the whole thing that just do what you feel comfortable doing. Just do your part, right? And African society is very welcoming. And I can say this, and I mentioned earlier, you can hear from my accent, I'm from Cameroon. And I go often there. I do research in different African countries. And so they're very welcoming. And so I will encourage you, talk to people. There are people in different parts. I mean, you throw an email to me, I could put you in line with some people. And there are a lot of people, right, where we have human rights program here. I keep talking about Dr. Satan about here with the human rights program. And whereas human rights students here at the University of Dayton, they are in Malawi. There's a place, a former student, a UD grad, the University of Dayton grad, he's in Malawi, where students come in there, engage in different kinds. So there are incredible opportunities, right, available for anyone who wants to go to Africa to do something, right? And very important also, is about what Africa informs us about who we are. I mean, sometimes there are people who say that you don't appreciate your country until you look at it from outside. And many of our students who go to different parts of Africa, they look at the United States through the lens of outside, and they come back more determined to engage in certain things. Some change careers, some get into development studies, some get into the foreign service, some get into, some create programs which they shuttle to and fro from Africa. We have a former UD student, in fact, a civil engineer, Justin Fozano. He decided, he was so moved by the emotional experience that he decided that he will start an NGO, an non-governmental organization, to educate young people in Africa, to help them get life skills through soccer. That's not something he was thinking about before he went to Africa for the first time. So there are so many areas in which one can apply their talent. Dr. Nevada, other questions?
That's it from the Q&A section.
Okay, so again, on behalf of the planning committee of the Global Voices Symposium, or there's someone whose hand is raised, can you put the question on the chat so that we're able to read it? Eva Kennedy? Can you put the question on the chat? Okay, I'm looking to see whether a question is going to come in. Okay, so in the absence of any question, I know Ms. Eva Kennedy, I know her, right? So, I mean, so if a question comes in, I think I should be able to answer it, right? So, but as I was saying that, I want to thank very much all of you for joining this webinar today. All of you for helping us understand and realize that Africa matters. All of you for being a part of this wonderful conversation. Again, as I said at the beginning, that this is just the beginning of this symposium. If you haven't registered for the sessions tomorrow, please do not forget to register. The symposium is free and open to the public, but registration is required. And I want to also thank the Global Voices Planning Committee members who said that, who supported and agreed that we focus on Africa in our century. In fact, we debated whether or not to go. Initially, it was planned for a face-to-face. We debated whether or not to change it to virtual. Yeah, we had some glitches at the beginning, but I'm glad it was virtual because I saw some names and I saw some people from the other side of the Atlantic, right? And so again, we thank you very much. We hope that you will take a message, you would join in this journey to re-educate people about Africa, to continue to read about Africa, to continue to pay attention about Africa, to continue to be an advocate for Africa. Again, I'm going to call on Dr. Sutton Nabana if there is anything else to add, right?
Oh, I mean, I'm just here to provide you technical background support, but we're very excited about the Global Voices Symposium, and we hope that you will join us tomorrow for the rest of the sessions, which are the student session, which is on perspectives on global education and impact. Then we have another one on resetting global awareness during the global pandemic. And then another session as well on new directions to promote global education on college campuses and communities. And finally, we have the keynote speaker in the evening, and we hope that you will join us for these sessions as well as with the keynote speaker as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, again, thank you all very much for joining this session. Have a wonderful evening. And for those who join us 5-6 hours ahead of time, have a good night, and we hope we will see you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.